Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we are going to talk about a country that has stood at the center of American foreign policy debates for more than 60 years. A country just 90 miles away from the shores of Florida. A country whose name still triggers strong emotions in Washington. Cuba. But this time, the conversation is different, because the names attached to this debate are not new. Donald Trump, Marco Rubio. And the question many experts are now asking is simple, but dangerous. Could Trump and Rubio reshape America's policy toward Cuba once again? And if they do, what will be the cost for Cuba, for the United States, and for the world? This is not just a story about sanctions. It is not just a story about ideology. It is a story about power, history, and unfinished conflicts. Tonight, we break it all down. To understand why Cuba continues to matter so much in American politics, we need to go back. Not years, but decades. Cuba is not just another foreign country for the United States. It is symbolic. It is emotional. And for some politicians, it is personal. For more than 6 decades, Cuba relations have been defined by hostility, sanctions, and mistrust. Even after the Cold War ended, Cuba remained frozen in time, politically and diplomatically. But why? Why does Cuba, a relatively small island nation, still occupy so much space in American political debates? The answer lies in history, ideology, and domestic politics inside the United States. In 1959, everything changed. Fidel Castro overthrew the US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista. What followed was a socialist revolution that aligned Cuba closely with the Soviet Union. For Washington, this was unacceptable. A communist government just 90 miles from US shores was seen as a direct threat to American security. The US responded with diplomatic isolation, economic sanctions, covert operations, and eventually a full trade embargo. This embargo, first imposed in the early 1960s, is still largely in place today. The Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, but the embargo remained, and Cuba became a political symbol rather than just a nation. Fast forward to the 21st century. In 2014, President Barack Obama shocked the world by announcing a historic opening with Cuba. Diplomatic relations were restored, travel restrictions were eased, embassies were reopened. Many believe this was the beginning of a new chapter. Then came Donald Trump. When Trump entered office in 2017, he promised to reverse what he called Obama's soft policy toward dictators. And Cuba was at the top of his list. Trump did not just undo Obama's Cuba policy, he went further. Under Trump, travel restrictions were reimposed, financial transactions were limited, sanctions were expanded. Cuba was later redesignated as a state sponsor of terrorism. Trump's message was clear: no normalization without regime change. But Trump did not act alone. Behind many of these decisions stood one man, Senator Marco Rubio. Rubio, the son of Cuban immigrants, built much of his political identity around a hardline stance against the Cuban government. For Rubio, Cuba is not just foreign policy. It is personal history, it is ideology, and it is a political weapon. Rubio has consistently argued that engagement with Cuba only strengthens what he calls a brutal communist regime. He pushed for stronger sanctions, diplomatic pressure, isolation rather than engagement. And during the Trump years, Rubio's influence over Cuba policy was undeniable. Even today, Marco Rubio remains one of the most powerful voices on Latin America in Washington. He sits on key Senate committees. He has deep connections within Republican foreign policy circles. And he has Trump's ear. With Trump's possible return to power, analysts believe Rubio could once again shape U.S. policy toward Cuba, perhaps even more aggressively than before. And that raises serious questions. Some experts now warn that Cuba could face expanded sanctions, financial isolation, diplomatic escalation, even indirect confrontation. But why now? The answer lies in global politics. Cuba is no longer isolated in the same way it once was. In recent years, Russia has renewed ties with Cuba. China has expanded economic influence. Iran has strengthened diplomatic cooperation. Venezuela remains a close ally. For Washington hawks, this is alarming. To them, Cuba is no longer just a communist relic. It is a strategic platform for America's rivals. And that is where Trump and Rubio's worldview becomes dangerous. Donald Trump's foreign policy is built on a few simple ideas. America first, strength over diplomacy, pressure over compromise, loyalty over institutions. Trump views diplomacy as a transaction. If a country does not give something, it deserves punishment. Cuba, in Trump's eyes, gave nothing, so it was punished. If Trump returns to power with Rubio playing a key role, analysts predict further tightening of sanctions, full reversal of Biden-era relaxations, and increased pressure on allies to isolate Cuba. Stronger rhetoric framing Cuba as a security threat. But critics warn this strategy has failed before, and it could fail again. While politicians debate ideology, ordinary Cubans pay the price. Sanctions have contributed to food shortages, medicine shortages, economic collapse, mass migration. Millions of Cubans have left the island in recent years. And critics argue that hardline policies strengthen the government, not weaken it. Marco Rubio was born in Miami to Cuban immigrant parents. His family left Cuba before Fidel Castro officially came to power, but the trauma of exile shaped his worldview. For Rubio, Cuba is not an abstract issue. It is emotional, it is cultural, it is political. From the very beginning of his political career, Rubio positioned himself as a defender of Cuban exiles and a relentless critic of the Cuban government. His message was consistent. The Cuban regime understands only pressure. This belief became the foundation of his foreign policy ideology. To understand Rubio's power, you must understand Miami. South Florida is home to one of the most politically active Cuban-American communities in the United States. For decades, this community has influenced U.S. elections, shaped foreign policy narratives, punished politicians who supported engagement with Cuba. In Florida, especially in tight elections, Cuba policy is not foreign policy. It is domestic politics. Rubio understood this better than anyone. It is important to note that Cuban Americans are not a monolith. Younger generations tend to support travel to Cuba, cultural exchange, gradual normalization. But Rubio aligned himself with the older, more hardline exile groups. Why? Because they vote, they donate, they mobilize, and they demand confrontation, not compromise. Rubio has consistently rejected diplomacy with Cuba. When Obama reopened relations, Rubio called it a gift to a dictatorship. When embassies reopened, Rubio argued diplomats should not shake hands with tyrants. In Rubio's worldview, engagement equals surrender, and that belief placed him directly in conflict with diplomats, academics, and human rights organizations. When Donald Trump ran for president in 2016, Rubio initially opposed him. They clashed, they insulted each other publicly. But politics creates strange alliances. Once Trump won, Rubio recognized an opportunity. Trump needed legitimacy on foreign policy. Rubio needed power, and Cuba became their common ground. During Trump's presidency, Rubio's influence was visible. Key decisions included reinstating travel bans, limiting remittances to Cuban families, targeting Cuban military-linked businesses, redesignating Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism. Many of these moves aligned directly with Rubio's long-standing demands. Former officials later confirmed that Rubio was often consulted on Cuba and Venezuela policy. In some cases, his approval was essential. Rubio framed sanctions as moral tools, but critics argue they were political weapons. Each new restriction sent a message, not to Havana, but to Miami. A message that said, "We are tough. We remember your pain. We will never forgive." This approach turned Cuba into a campaign issue rather than a diplomatic challenge. After 6 decades of sanctions, what has changed? The Cuban government still stands. The ruling party remains in power. Political repression continues. But ordinary Cubans suffer. Food shortages, medicine shortages, mass migration, and critics argue that sanctions give the Cuban government an excuse for its failures. One of the most visible consequences of hardline policy is migration. In recent years, record numbers of Cubans have left the island. They arrive in Florida, Texas, Mexico. Ironically, the same politicians who demand tougher sanctions also criticize increased migration. This contradiction raises uncomfortable questions. Rubio's Cuba policy cannot be separated from his broader ideology. He sees the world as a battle between democracies and authoritarian regimes. In this worldview, compromise is weakness, dialogue is delay, and pressure is the only solution. This black and white thinking appeals to voters, but it often fails in reality. Rubio groups Cuba with Venezuela, Nicaragua, sometimes even Bolivia. He refers to them as a troika of tyranny. This language simplifies complex political realities into moral absolutes. And once a country is labeled evil, diplomacy becomes impossible. Many former diplomats disagree with Rubio. They argue that isolation strengthens authoritarianism. Engagement empowers civil society. Sanctions hurt civilians more than elites. Some even say Rubio's policies delay democratic change rather than accelerate it. Despite criticism, Rubio remains influential because Florida is electorally critical. Trump values loyalty over expertise. Rubio speaks the language of confrontation. In a political environment driven by emotion, nuance struggles to survive. If Rubio's approach defines future policy, Cuba may face permanent isolation, economic collapse, greater dependence on Russia and China, and once again, America may lose influence rather than gain it. After decades of sanctions, speeches, and political battles, one question still remains unanswered. What is America really trying to achieve in Cuba? Is it democracy? Is it punishment? Or is it simply the continuation of a policy that no one dares to change? To answer this, we must step back and look at the full picture. For more than 60 years, U.S. policy toward Cuba has followed the same logic. Pressure will force change. Yet the reality is undeniable. The Cuban government remains the ruling system, survives, political control continues. What has changed is the life of ordinary Cubans. They are poorer. They are more desperate. They are leaving in record numbers. If a policy produces the same outcome for 6 decades, can it still be called strategy? Or is it simply habit? Supporters of hardline policies often say, this time is different, but history says otherwise. Cuba has survived the collapse of the Soviet Union, extreme economic isolation. Why? Because isolation strengthens survival instincts. When a nation is under siege, change comes slower, not faster. One uncomfortable truth must be acknowledged. Cuba policy in Washington is not driven by Cubans. It is driven by American politics, election cycles, swing states, campaign donations, ideological signaling. Cuba becomes a stage, not a subject, and ordinary people become collateral damage. Donald Trump and Marco Rubio offer clarity. Their message is simple: no engagement, no compromise, maximum pressure. This approach is emotionally satisfying. It sounds strong, but strength without result is performance, not policy. Permanent hostility has consequences. It pushes Cuba toward Russia, China, Iran. It reduces American influence. It creates strategic openings for rivals. And it locks the U.S. into a past that no longer exists. The Cold War ended, but Cuba policy did not. Today's world is interconnected. Isolation no longer controls, it excludes. When America steps back, others step in, and influence is lost quietly. The voices never heard throughout this documentary. One group has remained mostly absent. Ordinary Cubans. They did not design the system. They do not control policy. They endure it. They want food, electricity, opportunity, dignity. Not ideology, not slogans, just a future. The debate is often framed as a false choice. Either support the Cuban government or support sanctions, but there is a third option. Support people. Policies can target power without destroying society. Engagement is not endorsement. Dialogue is not surrender. Real change is slow. It is uncomfortable. It requires patience. And it requires admitting that force alone does not create freedom. History proves this again and again. Every major transformation, from Eastern Europe to Vietnam, came through engagement, not isolation. Walls fall when people connect. Now when they starve, the next U.S. president will inherit a choice. Repeat the past, or imagine something new. Trump promises certainty, but certainty is not the same as success. The real test is courage, not confrontation. Success would mean fewer migrants at the border, a stronger Cuban civil society, reduced dependence on U.S. rivals, greater regional stability. None of this comes from punishment alone. At its core, this is not a political debate. It is a moral one. Can democracy be built on hunger? Can freedom be delivered through suffering? Can leadership exist without empathy? Long after elections end, policies remain, and history remembers outcomes, not intentions. The question is not whether America looks strong today. The question is whether it will be proven right tomorrow. Cuba is not just an island. It is a mirror, a reflection of how power is used or misused. For 60 years, hostility has failed to deliver change. The future now demands honesty and courage, because real leadership is not about punishing enemies. It is about shaping a better world. This was not just a story about Cuba. It was a story about choices and the consequences of refusing to change them. Thank you for watching.